I know Rich is presenting next door, and often Rich sort of starts out his presentation saying to keep all questions for the end. I'm going to do things a little bit differently here today, so feel free to raise hands. Let me know if there are things you want to kind of riff on or talk a little bit about. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit more conversational. This is a topic that I'm not here to share sort of a lot of technical specific details about how you might go about migrating systems, but rather sort of to more talk about the mental challenges that these types of projects tend to cause administrators, and some things that have impacted me and my team over the years. So by all means, feel free if there's something you feel like is relevant throughout. Feel free to raise your hand. We prefer that you don't shout out, so that way I can toss you this catch box and hopefully not break anybody's computer in the process, but that way it'll show up properly on the recording. So kind of to start things out, as I'm sure everyone in the room probably has experienced at one point or another, it's necessary in an IT environment to move from one platform to another, and oftentimes this is one of the scariest things that you'll have to do in your IT career. Everything might be working just fine, and you want to get to a place where everything is working just fine. But that process in between, where things are working just fine and where they're working just fine over here, is a whole bunch of sort of uncharted territory. But we're going to talk a little bit about how this isn't going to be as bad as you might think. It's beneficial for organizations to make changes in systems from time to time. We'll talk a little bit about how we've helped some customers accomplish this, how we've accomplished this internally for our team, how to plan for some of those large systems migrations, and also some of the things we've stumbled through. As much as you can always have a plan, there's always something that'll come and surprise you. So we're going to talk a little bit about changing MDM platforms, identity providers, collaboration tools, password managers, and figure out how we can make that happen. So first up, just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about who I am. I know I do see some familiar faces here in the room. I have a bunch of little plush zebra finches up here at the front of the room, and we have some at the booth as well. This is not actually our mascot, Mr. Peaches. He lives at home with me, but I sort of figured it would be good to show a little bit about sort of where the inspiration for our logo came from over at Electrona. So I'm founder at Electrona. We're a team of 7 full-time folks, about 10 folks in total that support a variety of customers. Helping make macOS management easier is sort of our primary focus as of right now. This can either be through services that we offer through our consulting arm to help organizations implement new device management, help with a tough project, perhaps a migration from one system to another, or just in trying to do some help with something that's complicated within your environment. Occasionally we provide sort of ongoing support in a managed services capacity for teams that sort of need some additional engineering help. And we've also built some software tools. We've got 2 products, Electrona Migrator and Electrona Patch. Electrona Patch, we've got about 500 applications that we can keep up to date on your Mac, automatically patch those in the background, MDM agnostic, and also help deploy new applications. My colleagues will be talking a little bit about that during the Intune presentation tomorrow afternoon, about how we sort of made managing macOS with Intune a little bit easier, since software packaging is a pretty tough thing there. And I'm not really here to sort of go over all of our offerings at Electrona, but I just figured to give you a little bit of background about what I do and the team that I manage. But what we're going to talk sort of about today is some of the challenging problems we've been asked to fix. Ultimately, as a consulting organization, we get brought in when people are really afraid of scary things that they don't know that they're going to be successful in accomplishing. So I'm hoping to help garner some confidence that these things might not be as scary as they might seem. And just to sort of talk a little bit about how we went about solving those things. So sometimes we get brought in with small organizations who don't know a whole lot about the technologies that are supporting their devices or supporting their users. Sometimes we're brought in to large enterprise organizations to help implement big changes, and we also have worked with some of the largest systems integrators in the country to help build their Apple management program, and trying to make a change between something that you've used before and something you haven't used before is often the thing across all of those customer types that we seem to get a lot of sort of fear and apprehension about. And I'm just curious, who in here has, I guess, had some sort of change in a major system within your environment that you've had to navigate while you've been employed there? Pretty much everybody. Okay. Did it go well? Anybody actually have a successful migration from one system to another? Anybody just go and find another job because they're like, I don't want to do this anymore because my company decided to switch to a thing that I don't want to use? Anybody have like 2 systems that were running in production for years because the migration sort of never finished? So these are things that happen, and we get it. Like this is difficult. It's probably been something that was one of the hardest things for me. Starting out in my career, I had a lot of on-premises servers. Managing devices with MCX and macOS Server way back in the day, switching over to managing devices with MDM, and switching between a few different MDM platforms early on, because the ones that are sort of industry leading at this point were not necessarily the ones that were industry leading at the time. And so, my experience, these changes that happen within organizations where you're looking to make a big shift from one platform to another really fall into a few different categories. One of them is, it could be cost, certainly in the last few years. I know I've talked with a number of folks that are here and may not even be gainfully employed at the moment because their organization is downsized, and they might be here trying to meet some new folks, try to network, and try to find a new opportunity. A lot of organizations obviously would rather, not let people go, but would rather figure out how can we save money in other places. And some of that comes down to, hey, our device management platform that we're paying for, they've slapped us with a huge price increase, and we're going to go shop this around. We're going to see, can we accomplish the same thing with a different tool at a lower price? It could be a feature gap. There are some major MDM platforms on the market, for example, now that do not currently support declarative software update, do not support a lot of new APIs that have been released in the last 12 to 18 months. I know that there's a major one that's been acquired and sort of spun off, and some things that have happened in the past few years where people are just sort of not sure, like, what is the future of this platform going to look like? It could be that you get new leadership or someone new on your team that says, hey, I love using this tool that you don't use here, but I used it at my last job and I really want to bring it in here. And maybe that's the reason that we're looking at making a change. So sometimes it's about those tough decisions. Sometimes it's about a platform that used to be amazing isn't amazing anymore, or maybe it's still pretty good, but there's something new on the market that we really want to try out because it's going to get us some additional benefits technology-wise for our organization. And again, sometimes it could just be somebody new on the team, or your boss decides, hey, I want you to use this thing, and you might not agree, but it's helpful for you in order for you to sort of be the hero within your organization, to be able to say, hey, I've got this, I'm excited about it, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to grow and learn something new, and being well equipped to help your organization through these transitions can be really valuable for your team, and allow you to get recognized for the admittedly hard job you're doing. IT is often sort of a bit of a thankless job, as I think we all recognize, but ultimately being able to get through a major project like this and see it go well, certainly should feel good to you, but often gets recognition from others within your organization that are like, wow, I really thought this was going to be a nightmare and that system was going to stick around for 2 years and not change, but actually we saw something good happen here. The other thing to be aware of, kind of per my what I was talking about earlier with vendors who may slap you with a huge price increase. I think in a lot of ways we sort of get to know our vendors and we get to like them. Certainly, we're also a vendor for some software products for our customers, and I understand it's sort of a tenuous place to have a, where you have to pay a subscription every year to a vendor in order to keep using that software. And you never sort of know what that price is going to be next year. Some years, we don't see a whole lot of changes in the industry, and then some years there are significant price increases that we wouldn't have expected. And it's good for you as the administrator or the person, running an IT team or working in an IT, procurement role to be able to say, you know what, my team has got this under control. So if you want to hand us this huge price increase and we're not happy about it, we have other options. And that puts you in a much better negotiating position with your vendors to be able to say, that's cool, 20% increase, very interesting, but if that's how you want to play this, we might look at something else. And that may end up meaning you don't have to do a migration because the person on the other side says, oh, I actually believe this person, they're going to make a change and we'd like to keep them as a customer. But if they aren't flexible with you, it allows you to, be able to make that transition and have it be something you can afford and have it be something that isn't incredibly disruptive. So to kind of talk a little bit about how to go about accomplishing this in a way that doesn't give you nightmares, doesn't give you headaches, doesn't make you want to run and find something else to do other than working in your current role. I think there's two areas that I would recommend focusing your energy in to make this a little bit easier on yourself. For example, Electron has been a long-time Jamf partner for many years. We've been helping customers deploy Jamf Pro, helping customers learn about Jamf Pro. I used to teach the Jamf 200 and Jamf 300 certifications. I hold a number of Jamf certifications. And I know how to manage devices in Jamf Pro really, really well, probably better than any other MDM in the market. And this can make it a little scary to have to do that within a different platform that I haven't used before. Our team has been, as I mentioned, we've got a talk tomorrow on managing devices in Microsoft Intune, managing Macs in particular. This was something new for our team, and was something we hadn't really done a whole lot until the past couple of years. Intune really didn't have a huge presence on Mac OS, but we're starting to see more customers asking for help in that area. And if I had simply sort of taken the training that I received from Jamf and sort of just stuck with, well, I know how to do this inside of this box, which is how to manage devices within Jamf Pro. I might not be as familiar when I'm looking at a different MDM platform. What I'd recommend instead, and something that I've done myself and encourage my team to do as well, is to take a look at the non-vendor specific documentation as well. Certainly, I would still say that Jamf's certification training is some of the best in the industry. I wish other MDM vendors offered more training and certification. I think that would be really helpful. But Apple has documentation and training resources available for the full MDM specification. You can read, you can take a look at it online. There are guided online trainings for the deployment and management exam that Apple offers. And it's often helpful just to know what's available that your MDM may or may not be supporting. We discovered a new API that came out last year for automated device enrollment that we sort of assumed Jamf is top of their game most of the time and zero-day support for new OS. And it turned out that this feature had not yet been implemented. And had I not been familiar with sort of what the MDM specification offers and watching videos at WWDC, like what's new for managing devices, I might just assume that this isn't even something that's possible when in fact there are 3 or 4 other MDMs on the market that do actually have this feature already implemented. And now I'm banging on the door at Jamf and saying, hey, how about you get this implemented because we'd like to use it. Yeah, absolutely. Can I toss that? Yep. Oops, sorry. I'm up here, you're down there.
I've been interested in taking the 200 track for Jamf.
Yeah.
My question is, if I don't build our Jamf environment and have to build it out basically, but I have to be in there to use it, and I want to leverage it further than we're using it currently, the 200 track is really the best way to go, or does the 100 track give you, is enough information?
So the Jamf 100 is an online, self-guided, free course that you can take. I definitely start there. I'd also recommend, as I'm mentioning here, like take a look at the Apple device support kind of online resources as well, and I'd kind of look at both the vendor-specific stuff and the stuff that's provided by Apple. But yeah, I would say certainly start with the 100. You can't beat the price, and you can do it at home. And I'd start with that. But I would say, as far as instructor-led training goes, certainly I would definitely recommend, if you feel like you're ready for it after taking, the 100, you're like, hey, I'd like to do this in person, do something hands-on, would absolutely recommend taking a look and taking a Jamf 200 course. And I recommend that to even folks that don't use Jamf Pro, because it is a fairly good overview of the concepts as well, and often helpful to even look at something that you don't use every day, even if you weren't using it. But if you are using Jamf Pro, obviously that's going to be really helpful to find your way around.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, totally. If you want to toss that back up here, I think it keeps listening to you unless it's on its home. So, but if anybody else has questions. So sort of to wrap things up, if you've done a lot of vendor-specific training, take a step back, try to understand the fundamental underlying technologies and, functional definitions that, that essentially what your application is doing as it relates to whatever it's connecting to. So pretty much in all these cases, whether we're talking about email, whether we're talking about device management, if we're talking about identity providers, essentially they all use the same underlying technologies, and understanding how those technologies work allows you to understand sort of the fundamental core functionality, and then all that you're looking at is what's the difference in the user interface. Second, of course, is building capabilities around change management and planning for a big project like this. I would imagine that some of the folks who said, hey, I've got a product we've had in place for 2 years and we haven't made any shift from the old one to the new one, I would imagine that some of that might come down to no one really being responsible for making sure that we get from point A to point B. And perhaps not having good communication with your users about what that transition is going to look like. Maybe not clear, expectations derived with your, internal stakeholders. Could be that you've had some turnover in the team or readjustments in roles, and ultimately nobody's actually responsible for making these system changes happen. So really in our experience, communication is key. Over communication, generally better than communicating too little. Communicate early, communicate often, and if it isn't going well, or something is going too slow, speak up about it and try to get it done. I mean, I think, I certainly am not someone who hasn't procrastinated on things. I have a long to-do list of things that I haven't gotten done this week, trying to prepare this presentation. I get it. But ultimately, your stress level comes down as you sort of put things aside that have been taking up a lot of time and mental energy. Once you've got a plan and can see the beginning, middle, and end, that kind of helps alleviate some of that worry and stress. And it also prepares you better for those unexpected challenges that we'll talk a little bit about later, where once you have the plan, everything's going to go totally sideways, even though you didn't expect it to. But at least you've got a good idea of what it was supposed to look like. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump into talking about a couple projects we've worked on and what went well and what didn't go well. Any thoughts or questions so far? Cool. So first one I want to talk about is moving between MDM platforms. As I mentioned before, we've got customers that we've helped with Jamf Pro, moving from on-premises to Jamf Cloud, moving from one Jamf Pro to another instance, moving from Workspace ONE to Microsoft Intune. And we've worked with a variety of other MDMs like Kanji, Mosel, Adigy, as well as even some smaller ones, like Meraki Systems Manager, Manage Engine, just to name a few. I think there's probably a few I even left off that list. As I mentioned, again, I'm going to keep pitching my colleagues' talks. Talk tomorrow on managing Macs with Intune, and they'll go into sort of more details on the technical specifics. But I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our customers that was using a legacy MDM platform that was managed by a previous MSP, and they came to us and they said, "Hey, we've got this problem. Our MSP isn't working with us anymore. We have devices that were managed. They're not talking to us, and we also don't really have money to pay them to fix this. So we want you to just come in and take it over and get everything fixed." So, to kind of summarize, we've got something like a good number of Macs, all in sort of different states. They're all currently managed by a different MDM that we don't have any access to. And how do we help them sort of get that figured out? And I think I sort of spilled the beans on one of the big issues here, because initially we thought, well, all we need to do is get a snapshot of your configurations that you have in your existing MDM. We can build that out in the new one, kind of make sure we've got like for like between these two systems. And then all we really have to do is talk to you about, okay, what scripts do you have? What configuration profiles are you deploying? What sort of what settings do you want applied? What do you want automated enrollment to look for? How many different employee personas do you have within your organization? What are the different apps that every person needs on the team? And we'll just kind of look at how that's currently configured. But as I sort of spilled the beans on earlier, turns out we didn't actually have access. There was no clear documentation. The old MDM had been shut down, and they said, the MSP that we reached out to, and we said, okay, fine, do you have something written down about what these configurations are? And they said, no, not really. They kind of gave us some vague things around, everybody gets, these two web browsers. We've got Chrome and Firefox installed, but we really can't remember what the rest of it was. But this customer has some security controls they need, make sure that those are applied as well. But, they're currently on the Mac, so you should be able to figure it out. The good news that we discovered was that the previous MSP was not using automated enrollment. And most users within the organization had admin rights, so we could at least remove the old MDM profile. That was, kind of a positive piece. We didn't have access to the old MDM, and some of this, we had to work with the customer and say, okay, what do you want this to look like? But part of it was that they had said, well, we kind of want it to look like it does today. So rather than being able to, jump into the existing MDM and kind of click through, download configurations, download profiles, the only option we had was to sort of look at end user devices that were already configured. So we reviewed the details inside of system settings in device management to take a look at what profiles are installed, what are they called, what settings are applied. We pulled the configurations inside of library managed preferences to download any sort of specific defaults configurations that we had for various applications, any sort of restrictions that were applied, things like that, and kind of reviewed that. We looked at the installed applications on each user's computer and sort of just sent around a survey to some key stakeholders in each department, and we said, hey, what apps are you using? Because that way we can hopefully build this out so that it works the way you'd like it to work. And with that, we got some real progress, but it was not sort of how we expected this to go. And everything was going pretty well at this point. We had a build out of the new configuration inside of Jamf Pro in this case. We did a demo with the customer. We showed them, here's how this is going to go. Your user's going to sign in if they have an existing Mac. We'll make sure not to bother them by installing a whole bunch of applications they have already, but we'll help get everything up to date. So everything seemed like it was going super well, and we knew we could remove the old MDM profile, so we were like, we just need to have people, get their computers enrolled. Turned out there was another curveball. During our discovery process, we discovered that a bunch of these Macs were actually bound to a also decommissioned directory server. And some of these users, in fact, did not have admin rights on their Mac. And the only account that did, we didn't have the password for. And if anybody's dealt with directory-bound Macs and trying to use the reset password utility in macOS recovery, that didn't work at all. We just got a series of error messages telling us that we couldn't reset the passwords. So for a good number of these Macs, we really had no way of helping the end user. We had to come up with a different way to solve this. And the nice thing, I guess, was that some of these computers were in Apple Business Manager once we helped them get an ABM account set up. So we were able to do some things as far as helping with automated enrollment going forward, but it was a little bit of a mess. Anybody run into, I see some smirks, but has anybody run into sort of like, oops, something got shut down that probably shouldn't have? So kind of came up with a new plan for those that had been set up with this, bound to this decommissioned directory server. We said, you know what, I think we're just going to have to ship the user a different computer. Using our migration utility I mentioned earlier, we're able to help the user migrate their data using target disk mode at this point in time. Luckily, these were Intel Macs. Nowadays, this can be a little bit more challenging to get data migrated from an old Mac if you don't have admin rights, for example. So we set up the new Mac with automated enrollment with the user and then had them go through a process to migrate their data from the old one. Then we took the old Macs back, erased those, and then we were able to redistribute those to some of the other employees in the company because once they had been erased, we didn't have to worry about the attachment to the old directory server. For the others that we didn't have a directory binding issue, we were able to send documentation to each user. Basically, sent them an online link to where they could review what the process was to get their Mac managed. We broke them out into groups, and we said, if your Mac is one that is eligible for automated enrollment, you're going to download this package that has a script that'll kick off the profiles renew command. If you are somebody who doesn't have a Mac that is in Apple Business Manager, here's a profile-driven enrollment process. You'll go through that and get your Mac enrolled. And then gave them a place where they could confirm by opening a ticket with us that their Mac had in fact been enrolled, and we could verify that every user on the list actually got their Mac enrolled in the new MDM. And luckily, we weren't really worried about sort of the unmanaged process and timing because the old MDM had been shut down, so it was really just as fast as we could get these Macs enrolled in the new Jamf Pro instance, the better. And after this, we worked with the customer to build out some comprehensive documentation on how to enroll devices, what configurations were in place. We were able to set up a Git repository with all the configurations in Jamf Pro and ultimately put them in a much safer place if anything like this happened again. Hopefully it wouldn't since we were continuing to work with them, but ultimately, we did have success at the end of this project, but it was a lot more messy than we thought we had signed up for. And I think, just being aware that that's something that's probably going to happen for you in your organization where ultimately, as much as you plan, there's always going to be something you don't expect. So the more planning that you can have and the more anticipation of those potential issues, the better. And also just understanding, things like where do I find these configurations on the Mac if I can't find them in the existing, MDM server is, helpful knowledge so that you can sort of at least read the tea leaves on what you were trying to find out that you can't find out because you don't have access to the system. Questions about MDM migrations in particular. I'm going to talk a little bit about some other types of system migration after this, but I just figured I'd take a short minute here and just check and see if anybody had questions about this project or things like that. Yeah, I'm going to try to not hit anybody. You have to, just hold it toward your...
Did you do all of that remotely?
We did, except for the part where we had to get the computers back and erase them and reinstall macOS on the ones that the employees were sending back. But yes, this was a totally remote project. This was a couple years back, and employees were pretty dispersed around the country. So yes, it was all remote. Possible to toss over here.
All right, didn't know I was going to have to know how to catch today.
Yeah.
A lot of MDM providers also offer migration tools now whenever they, as an option or just as part of their onboarding.
Yeah.
good would you find most of them? Like how effective are they at pulling off a system from an old MDM and then reintegrating it into the new one, rolling out all the new policies correctly?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a couple different types of migration service that I've seen. One, like Jamf offers a migration service where they will help you move your database from an on-premises server to a cloud, Jamf Pro server. That is mostly just, taking your data and moving it to a different server. That I wouldn't necessarily consider what you're talking about, where it's a migration tool. But I do know that Jamf, Kanji, and perhaps a few others offer tools that sort of guide the user through moving from one MDM platform over to theirs, and kind of give the user a guided experience. And I would say, if you've got access to something like that, that makes it a lot easier. Less documentation. I think our team built more or less a similar type experience using Swift Dialog to guide the user through the process. It used to be a little bit easier because you could actually remove an MDM profile in the command line way back in the day, and now, because of user protections in macOS, the user is still going to have to click on some things. But yeah, I definitely say, that may be a consideration when you're looking at, what other solution to switch to is, how easy is that process going to be? I guess what I'd encourage you to do is make sure during your evaluation process with that particular MDM, take a look at that tool and find out, how much do you like it? I haven't actually used either of the ones that are provided by Jamf or Kanji, but if you have, I'd be interested to know what you think.
Well, Jamf actually locks theirs behind a when you pay for the service, you can use it.
which is why even as a partner, I don't have access to it.
Mosel had one that they allowed us to use and test, and it worked pretty straightforward. But I think the underlying structure of them all is the same. It's all running the same commands to remove it from the old MDM and then provision it for the new one and everything. So I was curious as to if you had used them and what your experience was, or if anybody else has.
I haven't used a ton of the off-the-shelf ones by the vendors. We, as a consulting company, often sort of feel like we have the responsibility of building something a little bit more bespoke. I don't know that we necessarily have to, but I think my team just sometimes likes fun projects like that. The other thing that I would say related to that is, and I just drew a blank. When you're looking at using, those types of, migration tools, think about what your end user is going to experience and make sure that it's as easy for them as it is for you. But, I think, as you rightly point out, the process is going to be similar regardless of what tool is available. And sometimes, as we did with this customer, simply putting together like online documentation with, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 may accomplish something similar. But I always like an app when there's an app available. So, very cool. Shall we move on? All right. So, going to talk a little bit more generally here about some other types of platforms that we've migrated users from. In the past couple of years, we've seen quite a bit of changes with our customers looking at different identity providers. So we've helped some customers move from sort of having no IdP or using something like Google Cloud Identity built into their Google Workspace account over to solutions like Okta, moving from Okta to Google Cloud Identity for a couple of customers that didn't want to pay for Okta anymore, and moving from moving over to Entra ID for customers that maybe had been using something on premises before, or some combination of moving between all of these different solutions. So one of these cases, we had a customer that had about 100 employees when we started working with them, and they downsized about by half, and found that their IT budget was one of the things that management really wanted to shrink, and their Okta renewal was coming up. And they said, we like the features that we have with Okta, but ultimately leadership has said, we're not paying for this anymore. Find something that we already have. I'm sure there's some other way we can log in. And obviously we didn't want to tell our end users, okay, well, you should set up a password for every application and not have single sign-on to all of your various apps. So instead, since the user was using Google Workspace, we said, it may not be as robust as Okta, but we're going to be able to help make it so that you can use your Google account to sign into many of the services that you have, and actually due to some of the SSO tax things, I know Johan and Bravas have got their SSO friendly website that they put together, sort of complaining about some of these things. But one of the nice things about moving over to Google Cloud Identity is that in addition to being able to sign into applications with SAML, they have their Google single sign-on, sign in with Google using OAuth that allows for you to use some applications that would charge you to use a proper SAML login for single sign-on, but you could use Slack on the cheaper plan and require people to use a Google account to sign in. So this customer is actually quite excited about saving a little bit more money in a few other areas as a result of making this change. So very similar to the process we went through in helping our customer migrate from what was, I think, actually might have been Profile Manager with the that MDM migration over to Jamf Pro. We made a list of everything that sort of was in the current configuration. Luckily, in this case, we did have access to Okta when they let us know that this was happening, and we thought we had a month or so to get everything moved over. We went in, figured out which applications were currently set up for single sign-on, which ones maybe weren't, what users had access to which one, what types of APIs were supported by each application. Did they have Skim for auto provisioning for the app? Did they support SAML? Were they using a different authentication mechanism? Okta supports sort of like injecting the password or using their own API to connect to some applications. What things needed to change when we went over to Google, because Google doesn't have all of the same support for every application. So we were really in a very confident place with this as well. Thought this should be pretty straightforward. We've got some time. We're going to plan this out. And then of course, as I mentioned before, nothing ever goes according to plan. Turns out the finance had it wrong as far as when the renewal date was, and we had about 3 days to get everything moved over before their Okta tenant shut down and people were going to be unable to sign into things. So we kind of had to pivot, schedule a downtime over the weekend, as this was expiring, adjust everybody's login, send them a reset to their Google Workspace account because they didn't actually have a password configured in that application. Luckily, this went okay, but it definitely was not how we expected it to go. We were just very glad that we had started to build out the list of what we had planned to do over a 3 or 4 week period and had to do it over a 3 or 4 day period. And ultimately, these things just sometimes have to go faster or have to go a little bit less pleasantly than we might expect. So we've talked a little bit about MDM. We've talked a little bit about identity providers. I think the thing to keep in mind here is that regardless of which tool you're looking to migrate to or from, same basics apply. Understand, what are the sort of underlying frameworks that these tools are using. Document as much as humanly possible about the system that you're migrating from and try to build out the equivalent in the new system and do your best to communicate with your end users. Email migrations, those are super fun, right? Anybody in here had to migrate from like an on-premises mail server to Office 365 or Google Workspace, or have to migrate between those two because you tried one and you want to move to the other, or you were using like a weird cloud email server that nobody uses anymore and had to go to one of the major ones? I think when I started my career doing this type of IT work back in 2008 or 2009, I think one of the biggest things I was doing at that point in time was helping small businesses migrate from like Microsoft Small Business Server hosting on-premises Exchange and going to Office 365 or to Google Workspace, G Suite, I guess at the time. And I will say that, has, I don't know, that torture that I experienced for those years, I think really sort of ingrained in me that this is a doable thing, but it also leads to sometimes unexpected outcomes. I think Johan and I were riffing yesterday on, the sometimes fun thing where like you migrate your calendar over from one system to another and all of a sudden you start sending calendar invitations to all of the people you've ever emailed for events that happened 3 years in the past. but ultimately, same process applies here. Whenever I was doing one of these email migrations, we're looking at what are all the mailboxes, what are all the groups, what are all the rules that we have as far as where email is supposed to route. What data do we need to migrate from one system to another? In case of email servers, I think the most painful part was always getting the mail from the old one to the new one. There are some tools that we use that have made this a lot easier. BitTitan's Migration Wiz is super helpful there. Sometimes the vendors offer some cool tools. I think I know that Google still offers like an appliance that you can use. It's a little complicated to configure, but if you've got a large scale migration and don't necessarily want to pay somebody else to do it, you can set that up. And then ultimately, you've got to kind of coordinate with your end users, let them know what's happening. Email's this fun thing that everybody expects to work all the time. So when you're doing things like moving over your DNS records and waiting for when email starts flowing into the new system, then you can begin or do the final part of migrating the old mail over. Making sure that your users kind of understand that process might not be perfect for a short period of time, but once everything's done, assuming that everything goes according to plan, you're going to have all of your email in the new system, all of your contacts in the new system, all of your calendars in the new system, and ultimately not lose anything in the process. I guess if we have any questions about email server migration, I'm happy to take those. Looks like maybe one in the back there, or just a general question. The catch box is here.
So I'm just wondering if you've ever migrated Mac clients from a Jamf Pro to Microsoft Intune.
Yeah.
And if you've done that, is there any special tools or resources you've used to make that go smoothly?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it just depends on making sure that you have everything built out, in the new system, in Intune that you want. There are definitely some features that don't exist in Intune in the same way that they do in Jamf, and making sure that that's going to sort of suit your needs. I think ultimately, as far as moving people over, there's sort of a few different schools of thought there. I've talked about sort of more bespoke migrations where we've helped end users actually keep the data on their Mac. If you are a super cloud forward organization where everyone is properly storing all of their work related data in the cloud service that you encourage them to use, which I'll talk a little bit about when we talk about endpoint backup here. The cleanest way to do this, I would say, is to just erase everyone's computer and have them start fresh with automated enrollment. If you talk with a number of the Apple folks here, they are very, very adamant about this. That is the right way to do this. That's, I think, often sort of described as some of the justification for why there isn't like an MDM migration API that exists. Like, don't bring over the cruft that you have from your old stuff into the new stuff. It really just depends on what tolerance level your users have for that kind of big shift. If they can handle it, I'd say that's certainly going to give you the cleanest experience. But if not, looking at using one of these open source or vendor-specific migration tools that guides the user through that process, I'd say is also key there. But I also know my team would probably be happy to talk to you about kind of what that process looks like. And I guess for the fourth time, I'll recommend folks take a look at the Managing Macs in Intune presentation tomorrow afternoon. I'm really hoping it's going to go well now that I've recommended it 4 times. Yeah, I think that would be what I recommend.
Thanks.
So endpoint backup is another thing that we've had to help folks move over from and to. Similar to all of these others, kind of figuring out, well, what are we using endpoint backup for? What is the goal with endpoint backup? We've got a lot of organizations that simply said, we don't want to pay for, Druva, CrashPlan, Datto. I don't know. There's so many like endpoint backup tools out there. And nowadays they're saying, what, we have Box, we have OneDrive, we've got Google Drive. Our users are supposed to be storing their files there. Why are we backing up the endpoint? And why are we paying an additional licensing fee for that endpoint backup solution? I still have feelings where I think it makes sense for some organizations, more from a, you have an employee leave the company and they didn't save things in the right place and you want the stuff they were working on. So sometimes it can still be worth paying that extra money just to have that peace of mind that if something sideways happens, or the executive's laptop goes in the swimming pool at the 4th of July party, and we want to get them back up and running with exactly what they had, even though they didn't store it all in the corporate file sharing solution. But needless to say, we've had a number of customers come to us and say, we don't want to pay for backup anymore. Help us get that moved over to OneDrive, help it get moved over to Google Drive. So ultimately, our main goal in that process was to make sure that at least users were compliant with backing up the things that management insisted on having backed up. And in most cases, this was like their documents folder and their desktop folder being backed up to OneDrive or Google Drive. And both applications support this. Microsoft calls it known folder redirection. Google Drive, I think it just is called backup, but essentially you go into the application and you can pick, the folders that you want to back up and have them stored in Google Drive. The downside is that I think, if I remember correctly, with OneDrive, this is actually something you can sort of assist the user in configuring for them. But we've got a number of customers that are Google Workspace customers. They're really happy with how much storage they get for free from Google. But Google does not provide administrators with any meaningful way to set these settings on behalf of the user. So we built a way to instruct the user on what to do, and we were able to at least read from a local plist on the Mac to find out if they had done it. We couldn't configure it for them. Writing to that location didn't actually set the setting, but we could confirm that those files were in fact backing up. So essentially, we just kept displaying these nagging reminders to each user on and on until they complied, and we then would also, with the list of users that took forever to respond, we escalated it to their manager, sent them Slack notifications. Ultimately, we were trying to make sure that the data that was critical to the company was stored somewhere before we actually canceled that contract with the endpoint backup provider. I think my colleagues will be talking about that either this afternoon or tomorrow morning about building some of the end user support tools that we've built. So I think similarly, figuring out what is the stuff that we care about, how do we want this configured in the new system, but sometimes you might not be able to actually set those settings for your users, so figuring out how do we inform our end users, but also how do we motivate our end users to actually do the thing we want them to do. And in this case, continuing to display more and more annoying dialog boxes on their Mac was a fairly effective way to get compliance. It's not the thing I like to do the most, but sometimes it's necessary if we want to get something done quickly. And then sort of the last one that I want to talk about is password managers. I'm guessing maybe somebody in here used LastPass before. You can admit it, it's okay. We did too. After the recent breach, I think many organizations are no longer trusting them, and so we had a lot of customers that said, hey, we've got thousands of passwords in LastPass and our contract is coming up in a month or two. Can we just get everything moved over to something different? 1Password probably being the one that we had the most customers moving over to. We had one customer that was like, oh, and also all of our internal development build processes are built using the LastPass CLI. We also need to figure out how to make sure that that doesn't get disrupted. So this was fun. We discovered that there were a number of open source tools in GitHub that actually helped automate some of these processes using the various CLI tools. There is an export functionality in LastPass that allows you to get essentially just a big CSV with all of your data and have that import into 1Password. We were able to build a script to help a user actually do this in an automated fashion and actually clean up that file. One of the problems we ran into with LastPass was our customer said, hey, we want you to move all of our shared folders over, but we want to make sure that our users don't end up with that shared folder data in their personal vault in 1Password when they do the migration. But LastPass does a wonderful thing where if you do the export process and you let your user actually export a CSV of all of their passwords, it doesn't just export their own, but it exports all of the passwords in the organization into that file. So if you let the user just go through the standard process, they would have a personal vault that had all of the passwords that they had, as well as all the passwords they had in each department. So we built a custom workflow that actually removed that data from the CSV before doing the import. And then we sort of had this sanity check with each one of these users to make sure that they didn't accidentally or intentionally import all of the company's data. We tried to unshare most of those shared vaults before we actually instructed the user to do the migration, so that way they only had access to the shared vaults inside of 1Password. Building support tools with a purpose also goes over a little bit more detail about the technical underpinnings of how we built those end user self-service tools. But ultimately, same process. What does the old tool support? What does the new one support? We noticed that MFA tokens didn't migrate over particularly well from LastPass to 1Password, so we had to instruct users to get those reset during the process. And again, communication, really, really critical. So that's about all I've got here. And we've got some feedback up here. I don't believe my slides are uploaded yet, but I will have those uploaded, and they do have my speaker notes, which are probably more useful than the really fun GIFs that Johan and I worked on last night up here. But hope you enjoyed it, and happy to take any additional questions at this time. Okay, if not, appreciate you all coming. Nice to meet you all. Thanks a lot.